Hey there, welcome back to another episode of Broke Up, Not Broken. If you're going through a divorce, don't worry, you're definitely not alone. This is your one-stop shop for mastering your life and your finances throughout the entire divorce process. In today's episode, we're talking with Larry Bilotta. After enduring 27 years in a loveless marriage, Larry discovered a breakthrough that changed his life and transformed his relationship. Larry has helped tens of thousands of people save their sanity, their marriages, and regain control over their own lives and mindset. As living proof that it only takes one to heal a marriage, Larry teaches men and women how and why all hope is not lost, no matter how desperate the situation may appear. So if you're feeling overwhelmed by your divorce or your current station of life, please don't be. Larry is here to help us break it down so you can feel confident and prepared by creating a clear picture of not only your financial situation, but how you can tackle the personal challenges that you might be facing along the way. So grab a cup of coffee or your beverage of choice, buckle up, and let's once again get you personally and financially empowered. Larry, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jimmy, thank you for having me.
So you do a lot of work in the space of like self-help and so on. And in the work that you do, you reference this chaos kid phenomenon. So introduce yourself briefly here, and then help us understand what this chaos kid phenomenon is and how some of our listeners may be experiencing it without even understanding that they are.
So what a chaos kid is a child who was raised in a home where the mother and father delivered abandonment, abuse, or neglect, physical or emotional or both. Okay, so what we have is a scale. 10, 9, 8 is the purpose side of the scale. And if you're a 10, 9, or 8, that has something to do with your parents' relationship. So if you're an 8, that's because they didn't quite see eye to eye. If you're a 10, they did see eye to eye. And so that's a very happy home, 10, 9, 8. Then 7, 6, 5, that's the twilight zone. The twilight zone is where you're raised, where they really don't raise you because they don't talk to you. That's why you're in the twilight zone. You have to kind of raise yourself. Then chaos begins at 5 and goes down to 0. And that's where abandonment, abuse, and neglect is. And so most of the people I talk to are not physically abandoned, physically abused, and physically neglected. They're emotionally abandoned. They're emotionally abused, emotionally neglected. And so that's really where abandonment, abuse, and neglect is. And so when you're emotionally, those things are given to you emotionally, you're considered to be a chaos kid. And when you're a chaos kid, you're actually raised in a place where you get your values from a chaotic place. And what the reason values are so important and the location on the scale is your values come from the people who raise you. And so what are values? This is the way we finish our food. This is the way we keep our promises. This is the way we do what we say we're going to do. All those are values, and we've got maybe 1,000 of them. And they're all in the subconscious mind. They're all packed away nice and neat in the subconscious. But if those values are chaotic, if this is the situation that we lie when we have to, we divorce when we have to, we quit when we have to, whatever's easiest, that's a value. And if you marry a chaos kid, you're marrying a person who's carrying chaos. And so now if you have values that are a 9 or a 10, and you marry somebody on the scale who's a 3 or 4 or a 2 or a 1, you're marrying chaos. And so what happens is chaos, this is really a strange situation, is that when you meet a guy, and I'm assuming that most of your listeners are women, when you meet a guy, he doesn't show you his chaos. He doesn't display it in any way. What he shows you is his charisma. What he shows you is his likability. That's what he shows you. And so now you've got like, oh man, this is what I'm actually going to marry. No, it's not. And why is that? Because you didn't ask about the home he was raised in. And even if you asked about the home he was raised in, you didn't ask what happened in that home. Where is he on the scale? And so was he abandoned? Was he abused? Was he neglected? Because that's going to come for me in my marriage to him in 10, 15, whatever years. So when somebody is in this chaotic thing, and if we talk about financially, chaos kids don't manage money very well. And so that happens, like Jamie, your kind of thing is when they step into the money realm, a woman marries a man who's chaotic with money. Well, it's going to be on her doorstep, just like right now. And she might resist it in the beginning because, I've actually talked to a lot of women who are stay-at-home moms. They give up their career, they dedicate themselves to their children, and they don't dig into the details of his life. And so when they do that, now they're left holding the financial bag, and the financial bag is a chaos pile. And that's because he's a chaotic guy. And he's a chaotic guy because he's a chaos kid. And she just didn't know when she married him. And so that's what happens.
So how do you address those in your coaching? How do you address those financial strains, right? So, and this is fascinating to me. I never heard of this concept. This is absolutely incredible. And I can see where opposites in this case don't necessarily, they attract, but not for all the right reasons. And so sticking with your comments about the money piece of this, what are some things that, and you're right, 99% of the people we work with are women. That's not because, we choose that. That's the only, our only choice. That's by our choice. But in many ways, it's because, frankly, women are a lot smarter when it comes to this stuff. At least they're the ones that reach out for the help. So what are some of the things they can do to manage that financial strain?
So if we think about one of the basic differences of men and women is men are risk takers. They can be risk takers. They can handle more risk. They can handle more of a gamble, whereas women are more security oriented. They can handle much less of a gamble. And so that's one of the things that happens with chaos kids. They take chances. They take risk. And if they've got a father who is an entrepreneur, they take a lot more risk. And if they don't make good decisions, if they don't have good character, then that stuff backfires on them, and then financial piles to the family. And so now it's on her doorstep all of a sudden. But the question becomes, like, if I married a chaos kid, like, is that like a mistake on my part? Well, why would it be a mistake when all he sold you was his charisma? It wouldn't be a mistake. You'd fall in love with his charisma, because chaos kids typically are very charismatic people. They're very likable. They're very charming. That's a word that's used to describe them. But once the chaos comes, now you're dealing with somebody who's completely different. And so women are very distraught when the personality changes, when the personality is dramatically changed. And so when women are in a financial mess, I like to say a smart lawyer is your best friend. Now, why do I say that? Because when you're dealing with a chaos kid and you're not in a place where you really can get into the whole energy thing that I deal with, but you're really kind of in a very physical world. And now you have to deal with a chaos kid, and you got to deal with a guy you cannot trust. Now, what are you going to do? Well, a good lawyer is your best friend, because a good lawyer is what you do. You put the court system between you and the chaos kid, because the chaos kid is too chaotic to do anything you can trust and rely on. Because remember, the subconscious mind that's running his life is a chaotic system, and you can't trust it. You can't rely on it. There's no goodwill there. So you put a court system and a lawyer between you and him. And you do that because their job is to protect you from the chaos in him. And so when you start to see it that way, okay, so if I put a good attorney and the court system between me and my chaos kid, I'm going to be safe enough to have myself and my children represented by the court system. Because that's really what the purpose of court systems are. It's to protect the woman from the chaotic man, or in some cases, the chaotic woman from the man who's the purpose guy. Sometimes that happens. So I want to explain the scale. The scale I've been doing this for 15 years. I've been using the scale. And what I do is I explain the scale, and then I ask to locate where he and she are. So the purpose is 10, 9, 8. Twilight zone is 7, 6, 5, and chaos from 5 to 0. So that's the scale. And so what is that? What are those numbers? And how do you locate yourself? If your parents were really together and they really taught you, you get 10, 9, or 8. And the only reason there's 10, 9, or 8 is because your parents might have not been really getting along really well, and that might rate an 8, or it might rate a 9. But if your parents were spectacularly in love, that would be a 10. So that's a 10 home with great values. But sometimes what happens is these parents, and this is a funny thing, it really boggled my mind when I started to discover it, is when parents teach that we need to take care of the less fortunate. The children get an idea, oh, take care of the less fortunate. Okay, I should probably marry the less fortunate. So now they're attracted to a chaos kid. Somebody raised from a really bad home, because that's the less fortunate. And so the parents don't know that what they're doing by taking care of the less fortunate. But I've brought this up, And I've told people, do you have anything in your family that took care of the less fortunate? My parents were always adopting people. They were always taking care of soup kitchens, and so they were showing exactly how to do that. And so they got the idea I should marry the less fortunate. So now a 10 marries a 0, or a 10 marries a 2. Well, a 2 value system is not a value system that you can rely on. It's not good for relationships. It's not good for money. It's not good for faith. It's not good for anything that we hold dear, especially if you grow up in a 10 home. So when you have these separate value systems, you're now having to deal with all the consequences of marrying the less fortunate. And sometimes that's really, I can't believe how many times that happens, but that's what the parents are doing. In all their good intention, they're giving the children a message: take care of the less fortunate. And the children advance it to, let's marry the less fortunate. That'd be the next best thing I could do. But now they're not prepared to marry the less fortunate because they're marrying chaos kids. And so one of the things I teach is called the care and feeding of a chaos kid. And the reason I talk about that is because the care and feeding of a chaos kid is taking care of a really exotic animal, like exotic spiders and animals and lizards and stuff. They're very delicate, very fragile creatures. And if you change their water, their food, their temperature, their environment too severely, they'll die. But that's the way you almost have to think about chaos kids. You have to really take care of them. And if you're not prepared to take care of them, you're going to be blown away because you're not ready to do it. You can't take care of them. Because, for instance, if we take the analogy of the exotic animal, you can't say anything you want to a chaos kid. You can't just blurt out your feelings. That's not allowed. It's not possible because they take it so many just wild ways. So you can't say anything you want to a chaos kid because they're not resilient. That's the problem with chaos kids. They're not resilient. They can't bounce back. They can't step away from hurt feelings. They can't forgive and forget. They can't do all the things that we do when we're raised in a 10, 9, 8 home, because that's a huge difference. So when I'm talking about a good attorney is your best friend, because when now realize you have a chaos kid, and that chaos kid does not have the best of intentions, and remember what's running their life is their subconscious mind. Well, what's in the subconscious mind? They don't know. They don't know what's down there, but that's what's running them. So the subconscious thoughts are coming up into the conscious, and now they're thinking these thoughts that are crazy and wild and erratic.
One of the things that we do, part of the services we provide are mediation services, right? And that's where people can get together in the same room and hash out their differences and negotiate their, basically the terms of their divorce from start to finish. We have 3 cases going on right now where we're helping people do that right now. And it's very friendly, it's very amicable. I would venture to guess that these are not the type of people that we would want to encourage to go through mediation, right? I mean, talk to me more about that, because we try not to use the court systems as much as we possibly can, because I recognize there's cases where you have to, because like in your point here, sometimes you have to let the court do its job, because that's the only way to control the uncontrollable, right?
Yes,
and
that's right.
But if I had a magic wand, every one of the cases I worked on would go through mediation just to keep themselves out of the courts, keep more money in their pocket, frankly, because in many cases, the only people that are making any are coming out ahead in a lot of these cases are the attorneys, because they're the ones that they're padding their wallets. So I'm going to refer, I guess, where we can't really negotiate with people like that through a mediation setting. And would you agree with that?
So if you think in terms of a chaos kid is 543210. That's abandonment, abuse, and neglect, and it's more severe as you go down. And it's not just a number, it's a value system. That's really what the numbers mean. They mean a value system. So if you want to mediate with a chaos kid who's a 2 and a wife who's a 10, that means she's raised in a really good home, has a really good value system. The parents taught a great father, great financial example and stability, and she's married to a 2. What happens? Well, the chances of that guy getting through mediation are not really high, because there's too much chaos governing his way of living and being. And so when it comes down to, actually what you're talking about a form of mediation. And that's really what you're saying. There's a form of mediation here, but if a guy is raised at a 2, that means he's got to really kind of fight all of these darker tendencies that are in his subconscious. And he's got to then think in terms of being rational, being, benefit of the doubt, all those kinds of concepts that we have, and reasonable and rational and having goodwill. What is goodwill? Goodwill is the ability to think good about the other person. Think good about the best interests of the children. Think good about my wife's intention, that she's not going to get some wild, crazy guy in her life and expose the children to that, right? So all that's based on what are you coming into? You're coming into a room where there's not an attorney. You're coming into a room where there's no court system. Like, what does that require? Goodwill. It requires a lot of goodwill. But if you don't have that in that chaos kid, you really can't finish the goodwill setting, because the goodwill setting really says we need goodwill for this to continue, because we need to cooperate. We need to have a give and take. We need to compromise. And so with those kinds of ideas in the setting you're describing, there's no backup court system and legal procedure. Because what does law do? Law says, we're going to force it on you. We're going to make you do it. Like if we talk about financial things, we're going to make you pay. Mm-hmm. You don't have a choice. We're going to enforce it with the police, right? That's a whole different system than the goodwill setting you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just to shift gears a little bit here, a lot of the clients that we work with, again, mostly women, and not by design, this is all started to unfold here. One of the, I guess, common threads among the experiences that I've seen so far in my years of doing this is that there's some infidelity going on. Everybody's a narcissist, right? Everybody's a narcissist. Whether they're actually a narcissist or not, who knows? But almost everybody says my husband or my significant other is a narcissist, right? So there's infidelity. There's sometimes they're hiding money. There's some financial abuse going on. There's some level of betrayal going on. Some of it stems from the gentleman going through a midlife crisis. Right. Mm-hmm. There's something that they've reached a break. Maybe the kids are grown now and it's just, they're empty nesters and they realize, wow, I'm left with just you. Right. I don't have the kids to distract us anymore. It's just the two of us. And do we really have a relationship anymore? And there's that midlife crisis going on. How do we handle that? What are some of and then maybe just layering in some of the financial things we need to be on the lookout for that type of thing when you feel like it's starting to rear its head?
So we've got, if a woman is raised in a good home and a man who's raised in a not good home, that's her subconscious and his subconscious. Mm. And now we've got two subconscious locations that are very different. So all those things you rattled off, infidelity and betrayal and all those kinds of things. What are those? Those are all attempts of a man to be loved. I want to be loved and I want to feel important. And one of the things as I talk to women, that becomes one of the last things they learn. The last thing they learn is that he needs to feel loved and he doesn't know how. And so what are affairs? Affairs are, I met some woman and she loved me and she kept on acting it out and I kept loving to get more of it. And so that's what the affair was about. And so the woman is surprised. I've talked to these women that are shocked and surprised because they didn't know that they were even supposed to do this. Then there's the women who pour themselves into their children as their life emotionally. They literally get all their emotional reward from their children. And now there's nothing left for the guy she married. Mm-hmm. Because if you look at her childhood, the instructions are installed in her subconscious mind to tune out the guy and to make her children be her priority. It's all built in the beginning. And so that's transferred over from the mother to the daughter. And now the daughter has it. And now she tunes out the guy and makes her children the priority. But there's all kinds of versions that people can do when they're in marriages. But the thing that you want to look at in your childhood, you ask, did my mother and father show me how to have a relationship of kindness and goodwill? Did we learn that? Did we see it? Did we feel it? Because if we don't have kindness and goodwill in the model of what we saw, like my mother my father left, and then she had boyfriends. If that's the story, where's kindness and goodwill? There's no kindness and no goodwill. So in her, so there's no expectation that she's going to get kindness and goodwill from him. And so now there's a lot of bad will. There's now a lot of resentment. There's a lot of hurt, and there's a lot of anguish and blame and cheating and all this stuff is there. Well, how do you have a goodwill relationship where you can mediate? Like, whoa, geez, I've always thought this, Jamie, mediation is always positioned as not legal. And because its position is not legal, it doesn't have legal power. And that can't make anybody do anything. And so what do you got if you've got mediation and no legal power to do anything? Yeah. Well, now you've got relying on people's goodwill and kindness as the way they gravitate to running the relationship. How's it going to go? Well, there have been some couples that just kind of fall out of love together at the same time. Not many of them, but there are some people who just fall out of love, and they kind of like agree, we're going to agree to disagree, and then they can actually cooperate in a divorce like you're talking about, where they can do all kinds of things like settling assets and custody in a very good way. And how many people do we know where the kids are living in two houses as a way of life? It's just very common, right? And if they all figured it out, why can't we figure it out, right?
So when your significant other decides that they want to drop the dreaded D word and tell you, I love you, but I'm not in love with you anymore, right? I've heard that one before. We've all seen that movie before. And it's you drop the dreaded D word, I want a divorce. What then?
So now you've got to decide, do I have a chaos kid and am I a purpose kid? And I think that's one of the first questions that you have to ask yourself. And so how do you locate yourself on the scale? 10, 9, 8, I'm a purpose home. 7, 6, 5, a twilight zone. That means I raise myself. They don't really talk to me to teach me. And then I'm going to abandonment, abuse, neglect, 5 down to 0. And if I locate where I am, then I can get a sense that, wow, he's a 2. Wow, I'm an 8. Like, what's an 8 and a 2 got in common? Very little. There's very little in common. So since we got so little in common, now the question is, do I love him? That's really her question. Her question is, do I love him? Because that infers I want to save him from something he can't even control. He can't control chaos. And she can't control it, not by behavior or force, right? So she's got to decide, am I willing to stay with this guy in his condition? Because it's like a mentally ill person, a person who's in a mental institution. Like, what do? You can't talk to them. You can't have a relationship with them. They're in a really bad state, and you can't humanly talk to them. And so once you realize, and that's going to actually increase the resolve that the woman has. Her resolve is, I'm an 8, he's a 2. How long can I live between an 8 and a 2? Because I love my values. He loves his chaotic values, and we're not going to really give up on them. We're not going to give them up, and we're not going to change them. So now I've got to decide, can I live with this separation? Can I live with all that's required? Because I made a mistake. I married the wrong guy. Why is he the wrong guy? Because he's a different value system guy. He's a 2 and I'm an 8. And I, by the way, I've been doing this for 15 years, and never have I said to anybody, or as anybody has said to me, I'm a 9 and I'm married to a 9. I've never heard it, not one time. In 15 years, thousands of interviews, never heard I'm a 9 married to a 9, never one time.
I am not surprised that we definitely tend to marry polar opposites, don't we?
Yeah, but remember why I do it, because I'm trying to marry the less fortunate. Like, I should take care of the less fortunate, which is what I was taught to do. Take care of the less fortunate. Yeah. But this allows a woman to really make a decision. Can I really live without this guy I love? I see a guy in there. I can see him. I think I could just get him out, right? And that's what they believe. I can just get him out. I can just extract the man I see. But he's being held by chaos. And because he's being held by chaos, that's like a bridge too far. You can't extract the guy from chaos. That's not something you have the power to do. Mm-hmm. And so maybe I just need to give him up. But why am I giving him up? I'm giving him up because of our locations. And by the way, If I talked to her 15 years ago, I could have found it out then, but she would have been no shape to hear it. She couldn't have heard that. Well, he's a chaos kid. He's a 2 and you're an 8, and it's not going to go well after this. Oh, who's going to hear that? But I love him.
Yeah.
I love the guy he is. I said, he doesn't get to stay that way. He doesn't get to stay that way. But she wouldn't have been able to hear me. And that's the point I'm always pointing out to people. If I would have convinced you 15 years ago that you can't marry him because you're an 8 marrying a 2, you wouldn't have heard me. So now if you couldn't hear me then, you can't hear me now, then you got to make a decision. This guy is not a guy you can save. He's a guy you love, but he's not a guy you can save. And that's really kind of what has to happen to a woman who's married to a chaos kid. He's a guy I love, but a guy I can't save. And once a woman gets that idea, she can start to realize, I can't save him, but I love him. And I don't have the ability and the skills to save a guy who's born in that home.
It's incredible. So carte blanche here. We covered a lot. I feel like we've covered a lot of different topics, and there's a lot of amazing nuggets of information here for our listeners to absorb and try to impart in their lives themselves, especially if they are dealing with a chaos kid and struggling with the challenges and the stress of divorce at the same time. So are there any questions? Like, is there anything that carte blanche here? Anything I should know? Anything our listeners should know? Final tidbits that you want to leave us with?
If you talk about women who marry chaos kids have a lot of guilt. And they have a lot of guilt about the relationship that happened in all the wrong ways. But I want them to not feel so bad. And the reason I want them to not feel so bad is because they can't conduct this separation of these value systems if they're feeling guilty. They can't be free to do anything if they're feeling guilty, because they're always feeling like they need to be punished, because guilt requires punishment. And so that doesn't help you. So what you want to do is you want to free yourself from the guilt of knowing, why did I marry this guy? I married him because he was a guy who presented himself as two guys. Okay, and I fell in love with the one guy, but not the other guy. The other guy was the chaotic guy that was buried in the basement and you couldn't see him. So that's not your fault that you didn't know that the guy was down there. This other guy was down there and you didn't know it. So that's not your fault that you were an 8 marrying a 2. You couldn't know it, you couldn't explain it, and nobody could explain it to you. And even if they did, even if a Larry Bilotta showed up and gave you the full explanation 15 years ago, you know what? You would have married him anyway. And then when I realized, I would have married him anyway, even though I was warned, I would have married him anyway. Why? Because I love my chaos kid. Okay, so now here we are on the other side of the story, and now we're 15, 20 years down the line. How do I feel not guilty? I feel not guilty because I'm an 8 married to a 2, or I'm an 8 married to, God forbid, a 0, right? What happened to a 0? Oh my God, you don't want to know. You don't want to know what happened. All kinds of stuff happened to a 0. But that's really what this is. This is the value system of an 8 marrying the value system of a 2. And now you can't live to heal it. You can't live to redeem it. And the only thing you can ask for is a miracle, which you can't control. You can't control a miracle. You can't ask for miracles every day. I need a miracle. I need my husband to be saved. Pray and pray and pray and pray. Well, if you believe you can pray and pray and pray and pray, and you're going to get your miracle if you never give up, if that's what you believe, then you got to stay on that train and don't get off, right? But if you have any doubt, if you have doubts that miracles are going to save you and save this man, then that's not going to take you all the way. And so now it's a thing of like, I've got to help the kids part from their mom and dad story, because the mom and dad story is I was an 8 married to a 2, and that's separate value systems, complete separate value systems. What happens in split up families? What happens is they have battle system values. And so that means the mother tries to put her values in. Then they go to the father's house and he tries to put his value systems in. And those kids are torn between the two value systems. And that's really what happens. And so the best thing to do with kids is to teach them that you are between two big cliffs of values. Now, on one side of the canyon, you've got your father's values. The other side of the canyon, you got your mother's values. And here's what your mother believes. And this is the thing a woman can teach her kids. She can teach her kids that these are the values that we believe in. These are the values your father believes in because of the way he was raised. And she can start to spell out, that we lie when it's convenient. We cheat when it's easy. She can lay out those values. But then she can lay out her values, which is what she learned from her mother and father, right? And she can start to teach the kids and let the kids decide. These are the values I was raised in. I was raised between an 8 and a 2. And now I got to make a choice. What do I want to do? How do I want to live? Do I want to live on my mom's values, or do I want to live on my dad's values?
Yeah.
And so this is all part of a woman feeling better about this ending that she's got to go through. Because that's really like a woman who's going through guilt and she's trying to end a marriage. What a terrible thing that is.
Yeah.
We don't want more of that.
No, and I see it happen all the time, right? I mean, and that's just, I think in human nature, we tend to feel guilty when we have to make these tough decisions and we know we're going to hurt other people that are in our lives. But if it's the best thing for us in the long term, we just have to be able to push past it, right? And what I've heard, from in the last few minutes of our conversation here, the theme that I'm picking up on is you have to give yourself some grace.
Yes,
right? You have to give yourself that opportunity to forgive yourself and give yourself some grace and move.
But there's got to be a story to that grace.
Yeah.
And the story to that grace is the 8 married to a 2, separate value systems can't stay together for a very long time. Yeah. They just can't do it. It's not humanly possible to stay happy with an 8 and married to a 2, or a 9 married to a 2, or a 10 married to a 0. These are too dramatic a separation. And so when kids are in the mix, the kids have to be taught, because that's something a woman can do. She could teach, this is what mom value systems are, and this is what dad's value systems are. And I'm not saying that dad's value systems are bad, but I want you to make the choice. Do you want to defend this value system, or do you want to be with my value system? You got to choose, because you're going to be living between 2 homes. That's 2 value systems. And so when a woman's feeling like she can teach without guilt her kids' values, she's going to feel like really good. And she doesn't have to make her husband the evil guy. She just has to say, this is the way that family valued everything. Yeah. And that's a family thing. That's not just the guy, it's the family. And if she's in a really chaotic mess with a really painful values, she's got to lay out to the kids, what's that dysfunctional family, what's that TV series? Shameless. Shameless is a dramatization of values that are really, really destructive. But that's kind of what we're talking about. Yeah, if you're in that kind of setting. But the big thing is, what are you learning from it? That's the big thing. And that's not easy to answer, but it's worth answering.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Larry, this was an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for joining us and imparting all this wisdom on us. I'm sure our listeners are going to have gleaned a lot of really good information. And if they were to want to reach out to you to connect with you to maybe get some help in their own lives, where can people find you?
Okay, so oddly enough, this is LarryBilotta.com. And if not that, like the You Can Save This Marriage.com is the program side of this. Okay. So the program is talked about in You Can Save This Marriage, and the other parts of the Larry Bilotta story are on LarryBilotta.com.
Excellent. I will make sure that all that information is in the show notes for our listeners. So if you're driving or you're not in a good spot to jot that information down, don't worry, it will be in the show notes for you. Thank you again, everyone, for joining in and tuning in and listening to this conversation today, and for supporting us all along the way. We've been growing by leaps and bounds here because we have an amazing audience, and a lot of people are starting to like and subscribe and follow us, which is awesome. So if you haven't already, please do so. Subscribe, like, follow, do whatever, all the stuff you do on socials. If you need help with your own handling the financial nuances of your own divorce, our team is here, ready and open, available to help all across the nation. We've taken on cases in almost every state at this point. We can work in all 50 states, so location is not an issue for us. More information can be found at allegiantds.com, our website. You can book a complimentary and confidential conversation with myself or one member of my team to get you the help that you need. So people like myself and Larry, we are really just here to help and support you and get you through this because you recognize it is very, very challenging. So, and we've been there before, right? At least I have. And I appreciate you tuning in. Thanks again, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you again next time.